I think the main reason why banks should be treated as public utilities, or at least considered, is because they become increasingly large, increasingly complex, and in many banking systems the markets have become increasingly concentrated, and this means banks have a dominant position. Because of this dominant position, it may allow them to take advantage of their market position. Now, we've seen since the financial crisis that the large banks have had to be subject to extensive regulation to restrict their activities. They've had to de-risk, they're reducing the amount of loans they're making, they're moving out of investment banking, and they're shrinking, but they're also being heavily constrained by regulation. And now the major banks, their profitability has fallen dramatically. Prior to the global financial crisis in 2007-2008, the largest banks were easily making profits or return on equity of greater than 15%, whereas now they struggle to make returns of even 10%. In fact, the returns they're making are very similar to the returns that public utilities are making. So banks now, the industry structure is very similar to a public utility structure. The economics of the industry have characteristics like a public utility. The banks are making returns similar to public utilities. So I think now it's time that we should consider possibly regulating them like public utilities. We should consider not only the current array of regulations on their activities, but we should also consider regulating their pricing and profitability. If we limited or regulated, oversaw the pricing behaviour of banks and their profit levels, that would also have the effect of constraining certain types of highly risky business and would also provide benefits for the economy overall, helping improve the safety of the banking system. Well, I mean, if you look at global bank regulation, a lot of the recommendations come from the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, which is a talking shop for the world's central bankers. So if there was to be a regulation of bank pricing and profitability on a consistent international basis, those recommendations would have to come from that body. Given the nature of that body, however, I think it's unlikely that they would be able to rapidly come to a conclusion. In fact, they've been relatively slow to come to conclusions on any type of regulation. So I would expect this type of regulation, if it's considered, to be considered first on a national basis, a unilateral basis, because multilateral regulations in the financial sector take much, much longer to introduce. For instance, if we look at the recent regulations that have been put in place by the European Union, the UK and the US as a response to the global financial crisis, the Americans were first implementing or putting in place legislation in 2010. The UK was later, 2013, and the European Union is just still discussing how they should restructure the banking sector, so it's not fully in place there. So multilateral actions always take much longer than unilateral. So if we were to introduce regulations on how financial firms price and to monitor their profit levels, then it's likely to be done on a national basis rather than on an international basis first.